The autumn wind swept through the palace gardens as Charles walked slowly beside his daughter-in-law, Kate. The leaves crunched beneath their feet, creating a peaceful soundtrack to their conversation. Kate had been struggling with the weight of royal duties lately, and Charles could see the exhaustion in her eyes. "You know, Kate," Charles said softly, his voice carrying the wisdom of decades in the royal family. "When I was younger, I thought being royal meant never showing weakness. I thought we had to be perfect all the time." Kate looked up at him, surprised by his openness. The usually formal king was speaking to her like a father, not a monarch. She felt a warmth in her chest that she hadn't experienced in months. The constant pressure of public appearances, charity events, and media scrutiny had been wearing her down. "Sometimes I wonder if I'm doing enough," Kate admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "The public expects so much, and I feel like I'm always falling short." Charles stopped walking and turned to face her. Without thinking, he reached out and took her hand gently in his. The gesture was so natural, so paternal, that Kate felt tears forming in her eyes. It reminded her of how her own father used to comfort her when she was young. "My dear Kate," Charles said, his eyes filled with understanding, "you have brought more grace and dignity to this family than you realize. William is lucky to have you, and so are we all." The moment felt precious and real. Here was the King of England, setting aside all protocol to offer genuine comfort to someone he cared about. Kate squeezed his hand gratefully, feeling some of the tension leave her shoulders. They continued walking through the garden, Charles still holding her hand in a gentle, supportive way. They talked about her children, about the upcoming royal engagements, and about the simple joys of family life. Kate found herself laughing for the first time in weeks. "You remind me so much of Diana sometimes," Charles said quietly, and Kate could hear both sadness and admiration in his voice. She had that same ability to connect with people, to make them feel seen and understood. The comparison meant more to Kate than Charles could know. She had always felt the weight of following in Diana's footsteps, wondering if she could ever measure up to the beloved princess. Hearing Charles acknowledge the similarity felt like a blessing. As they rounded a corner near the rose bushes, Kate noticed how peaceful Charles seemed. Away from the cameras and the formal ceremonies, he was just a man who cared about his family. She felt grateful for this moment of connection, this rare glimpse into the heart of the monarchy. "Thank you for this," Kate said, gesturing to their joined hands and the quiet garden around them. "I needed someone to remind me that it's okay to be human even when you're royal." Charles smiled, and for a moment the years seemed to fall away from his face. "We're all human, Kate. The crown doesn't change that, no matter how much the world expects it to." The sun was beginning to set, casting a golden glow over the palace grounds. In the distance, Kate could see the silhouettes of security guards maintaining their respectful distance. The moment felt suspended in time, like something from a fairy tale where kings and princesses could simply be family. "I should probably head back soon," Kate said reluctantly. "The children will be expecting their bedtime story." "Of course," Charles replied, but he didn't immediately let go of her hand. "Kate, I want you to know that you can always come to me if you need someone to talk to. Being part of this family shouldn't mean facing everything alone." As they began walking back toward the palace, neither of them noticed the figure watching from an upstairs window. Camilla had been looking for Charles and had spotted them in the garden. Her expression was unreadable as she observed the tender moment between her husband and her stepdaughter-in-law. The wind picked up again, sending more leaves dancing around their feet. Kate felt lighter than she had in months, buoyed by Charles's kindness and understanding. She didn't know that this peaceful moment was about to become much more complicated. The next morning brought a flurry of activity to the palace. Kate was reviewing her schedule for the week when her assistant mentioned that Queen Camilla wanted to see her in the blue drawing room. Kate felt a small flutter of nervousness in her stomach. Camilla had always been polite to her, but their relationship was formal and somewhat distant. Kate made her way through the familiar corridors, her heels clicking softly on the marble floors. The blue drawing room was one of the more intimate spaces in the palace, often used for private family discussions. When Kate entered, she found Camilla standing by the window, looking out at the same garden where she and Charles had walked the evening before. "Kate, thank you for coming," Camilla said, turning with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Please sit down. I thought we should have a little chat." Kate took a seat on the elegant sofa, trying to read Camilla's mood. The queen consort seemed tense, though she was doing her best to hide it. There was something in her posture that suggested she was choosing her words very carefully. "I hope you don't mind me saying," Camilla began, settling into the chair across from Kate, "but I couldn't help but notice you and Charles having quite an intense conversation in the garden yesterday evening." Kate's heart skipped a beat. She hadn't realized anyone had seen them. "Oh yes," she said carefully. "Charles was just offering some guidance about royal duties. He's been very supportive." Camilla nodded slowly, her fingers drumming lightly on the arm of her chair. "Charles has always been very caring with family members, sometimes perhaps too caring for his own good." The words hung in the air between them, and Kate began to sense that this conversation was heading somewhere uncomfortable. She could feel the temperature in the room seem to drop several degrees. "I'm not sure I understand what you mean," Kate said, though she was beginning to suspect she understood perfectly well. Camilla leaned forward slightly, her voice taking on a more serious tone. "Kate, you're a lovely woman, and you've been a wonderful addition to our family. But I think we need to be mindful of appearances, don't you?" Kate felt her cheeks growing warm. "Appearances? The monarchy has always depended on maintaining proper boundaries," Camilla continued, her words measured and deliberate. "People talk, Kate, they watch everything we do, and they're always looking for stories to tell." The implication was becoming clearer, and Kate felt a mixture of embarrassment and indignation rising in her chest. "Camilla, I hope you're not suggesting that there was anything inappropriate about yesterday evening. Charles was simply being kind to me during a difficult time." "Of course not," Camilla said quickly, but her tone suggested otherwise. "I'm simply saying that we all need to be careful about how our actions might be interpreted. The press can be quite vicious when they want to be." Kate thought about the gentle way Charles had taken her hand, the fatherly comfort he had offered. The idea that anyone could twist that moment into something unseemly made her feel sick to her stomach. "What exactly are you asking me to do?" Kate asked, her voice steady despite the turmoil she felt inside. Camilla stood up and walked back to the window, her reflection ghost-like in the glass. "I'm asking you to remember your position in this family, Kate. You're William's wife and Charles is my husband. There are proper ways to seek support and guidance within the royal structure." The message was clear, even though Camilla was being diplomatic about it. Kate was being warned to stay away from Charles to maintain a more formal distance. The warmth and understanding she had felt the night before suddenly seemed tainted. "I see," Kate said, rising from her seat. "Well, I certainly wouldn't want to do anything that might cause problems for the family." "I knew you'd understand," Camilla said, turning back with a smile that was now more genuine. "You've always been so sensible about these things." As Kate left the blue drawing room, she felt a heavy weight settling in her chest. The brief connection she had felt with Charles, the sense that she had finally found someone who truly understood the pressure she faced, now seemed like something she would have to give up. Walking back through the palace corridors, Kate wondered if she was overreacting. Perhaps Camilla was just looking out for the family's reputation, but the conversation had left her feeling isolated again, reminded that even within the royal family, there were invisible walls she wasn't supposed to cross. That evening, when Charles asked if she'd like to join him for another walk in the garden, Kate politely declined. She could see the confusion and slight hurt in his eyes, but she didn't know how to explain Camilla's warning without making the situation even more complicated. The walls of the palace suddenly felt much more confining than they had before. Over the following weeks, Kate found herself carefully avoiding any situations where she might be alone with Charles. During family dinners, she made sure to sit farther away from him. When he tried to engage her in conversation, she kept her responses polite but brief. The natural warmth that had begun to develop between them was being deliberately suppressed. Charles noticed the change immediately. At first, he thought Kate might simply be busy with her royal engagements, but as the days passed, he began to realize that she was actively keeping her distance. The realization stung more than he had expected. He had genuinely enjoyed their conversation in the garden and had hoped they were developing a closer relationship. One afternoon, Charles was in his study reviewing official documents when William stopped by for their weekly meeting about royal duties. William seemed distracted, running his hands through his hair in a way that reminded Charles of his own nervous habits. "Everything all right, son?" Charles asked, setting down his reading glasses. William hesitated for a moment before speaking. It's Kate, actually. She's been different lately. More withdrawn. I've tried talking to her about it, but she insists everything is fine. Charles felt a knot forming in his stomach. Different how? She seems sadder, more isolated, William explained, sitting down across from his father. For a while there, she seemed to be doing better. She was more confident, more at ease with everything, but now she's back to keeping everyone at arm's length. The conversation was making Charles increasingly uncomfortable. He had a growing suspicion that Kate's withdrawal had something to do with him, though he couldn't understand why. Have you asked her directly what's bothering her? Charles suggested, though he could hear the concern in his own voice. I've tried, William said with frustration. But you know how Kate is. She doesn't like to burden other people with her problems. She just keeps saying she's adjusting to royal life and that everything is fine. That evening, Charles found himself walking alone in the garden where he and Kate had shared their meaningful conversation. The autumn had deepened, and many of the trees were now bare. The beauty of the season felt melancholy, matching his mood. He thought about the moment when he had taken Kate's hand, how natural it had felt to offer comfort to someone who was struggling. It hadn't been romantic or inappropriate in any way. It had simply been one human being reaching out to another. Yet somehow that gesture now seemed to have created a wall between them. As Charles rounded the same corner where he and Kate had talked about Diana, he was surprised to see a familiar figure sitting on one of the garden benches. Camilla was there, wrapped in a thick coat, apparently enjoying the crisp evening air. Charles, she said, looking up as he approached. I was hoping I might run into you out here. Were you? Charles asked, settling down beside her on the bench. It's a bit cold for a leisurely evening walk, isn't it? Camilla turned to face him, her expression serious. I wanted to talk to you about Kate. Charles felt his pulse quicken. What about Kate? I think she's been feeling a bit overwhelmed lately, Camilla said carefully. The poor girl has so much pressure on her shoulders. Sometimes I worry that she might be looking for support in places that could complicate things for everyone. Charles studied his wife's face, trying to understand what she was really saying. Camilla, if you have something specific to tell me, please just say it directly. I've noticed that you and Kate have been spending time together, Camilla said, her voice gentle but firm. Private conversations, walks in the garden. I'm sure your intentions are completely innocent, but people might not see it that way. The pieces suddenly clicked into place for Charles. Did you speak to Kate about this? Camilla nodded slowly. I felt it was necessary. The monarchy has survived for centuries because we've been careful about maintaining proper boundaries. I was just trying to protect everyone involved. Charles felt a surge of anger mixed with disappointment. So you warned Kate to stay away from me. I suggested that she might want to be more mindful of appearances, Camilla corrected. Charles, you know how the press works. One innocent photograph of you holding her hand could become a scandalous story that would hurt everyone, including William and the children. Charles stood up abruptly, pacing a few steps away from the bench. She was struggling, Camilla. She needed someone to talk to, someone who understood what this life is like. I was trying to be supportive. I know your heart was in the right place, Camilla said, rising to join him. But sometimes protecting the family means making difficult choices about how we interact with each other. Charles looked back toward the palace, its windows glowing warmly in the darkness. He thought about Kate somewhere inside those walls, probably feeling more alone than ever. He thought about William worrying about his wife's well-being. He thought about the simple human connection that had been sacrificed for the sake of appearances and protocol. Perhaps you're right about the appearances, Charles said finally, his voice heavy with resignation. But I hope you realize what we've lost in the process. As they walked back toward the palace together, Charles couldn't shake the feeling that something precious had been damaged, possibly beyond repair. The royal family's annual Christmas preparations were in full swing, but the usual joy and excitement felt forced this year. Kate threw herself into organizing the children's activities and coordinating with the staff, using the busy schedule as a way to avoid thinking about how lonely she felt. Every family gathering reminded her of the distance she now had to maintain from Charles. During the traditional Christmas photo session, Kate found herself positioned carefully away from Charles. She smiled brilliantly for the cameras, but anyone who knew her well could see the sadness behind her eyes. Charles, meanwhile, seemed more formal and distant than usual. the natural warmth he typically showed during family events notably absent. William was becoming increasingly worried about his wife. He had tried everything he could think of to cheer her up, but nothing seemed to work. Kate went through the motions of royal life perfectly, but she seemed to be sleepwalking through her days. One evening, as they were getting ready for bed, William finally decided to confront the issue directly. "Kate, I know something is wrong, and I'm not going to pretend otherwise anymore. Please talk to me." Kate paused in brushing her hair, meeting his eyes in the mirror. "William, I've told you I'm fine. Just tired from all the Christmas preparations." "That's not true, and we both know it," William said gently, sitting on the edge of their bed. "You've been different for weeks. You barely speak during family dinners, you avoid Dad like he has some contagious disease. And you've been having trouble sleeping. I can hear you moving around at night." Kate set down her hairbrush with shaking hands. The concern in William's voice was breaking down her carefully constructed walls. "I don't want to cause problems for the family." "What kind of problems?" William asked, moving closer to her.
"Kate, whatever it is, we can work through it together."
"That's what marriage means." Kate turned to face him, and William could see that she was fighting back tears. "Your stepmother thinks I've been too familiar with your father. She's worried about appearances and what the press might say." William's expression darkened. "What exactly did Camilla say to you?" Through halting words, Kate explained the conversation in the blue drawing room. She told him about the warning to maintain proper boundaries, about the suggestion that her relationship with Charles could be misinterpreted. As she spoke, she could see William's anger growing. "That's ridiculous," William said when she finished. "Dad was being kind to you. That's what family members do for each other." "But what if she's right?" Kate asked desperately. "What if people do misinterpret things? What if I've already damaged the family's reputation?" William took her hands in his, looking directly into her eyes.
"Kate, listen to me."
"You have done nothing wrong. Nothing. Dad cares about you because you're part of our family, and because he can see how hard you work and how much pressure you're under." "But Camilla said—" "I don't care what Camilla said," William interrupted, his voice firm. "She had no right to make you feel guilty for accepting support from my father. And she certainly had no right to make you feel like you need to isolate yourself." Kate felt a flood of relief hearing William's words, but the anxiety was still there. "I just don't want to cause any trouble. The monarchy is bigger than any one person's feelings. The monarchy is also about family," William said, "and family members should be able to comfort each other without worrying about political implications." The next morning, William requested a private meeting with his father. Charles was surprised by the formality of the request, but he agreed to see his son in his study. When William arrived, his expression was serious and Charles braced himself for difficult news. "We need to talk about Kate," William said without preamble. Charles felt his stomach tighten. "Is she all right?" "No, she's not all right," William said bluntly. "She's been miserable for weeks because Camilla told her to stay away from you." Charles closed his eyes, feeling a wave of sadness wash over him. "William, I want you to know that my relationship with Kate has always been completely appropriate. I would never—" "Dad, stop," William interrupted. "I know exactly what kind of relationship you have with Kate. I know you were trying to help her adjust to royal life, and I know there was nothing inappropriate about it. Then why does Camilla think there was a problem?" William was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. "I think Camilla feels threatened by close relationships that don't include her. She's always been sensitive about her position in the family." Charles considered this, recognizing some truth in his son's observation. "But what am I supposed to do? I can't ignore Camilla's concerns entirely." "You can stop ignoring Kate," William said firmly. "She's part of our family and she deserves to feel supported. If that makes Camilla uncomfortable, then Camilla needs to examine why she feels that way." As William left the study, Charles sat alone with his thoughts. He realized that in trying to keep peace between his wife and his daughter-in-law, he had allowed Kate to suffer in silence. The question now was whether it was too late to repair the damage that had been done. Christmas morning arrived with a blanket of fresh snow covering the palace grounds. The royal family gathered for their traditional gift exchange and breakfast, but the atmosphere felt strained despite everyone's efforts to maintain holiday cheer. Kate sat at the far end of the table, making polite conversation with other family members while carefully avoiding eye contact with Charles. Charles watched his daughter-in-law throughout the morning, noticing how she flinched slightly whenever he spoke, how she seemed to shrink into herself whenever he entered a room. The change in her behavior was breaking his heart. This wasn't the confident, radiant woman who had brought such light to their family. After breakfast, the family traditionally took a walk around the palace grounds to work off the heavy meal. Kate was helping the children with their coats when Charles approached her quietly. "Kate," he said softly, "might I have a word with you privately?" Kate's eyes darted nervously around the room, landing briefly on Camilla, who was watching from across the foyer. "I should really help with the children," she said quickly. "The children are fine," William interjected, having overheard the conversation. "Go ahead, Kate, I'll take care of them." Kate looked trapped. She couldn't refuse the king's request without causing a scene, but she was terrified of disobeying Camilla's warning. Reluctantly, she nodded and followed Charles to a quiet alcove near the library. "Kate," Charles began, his voice filled with concern, "I want to apologize." Kate looked up at him in surprise. "You want to apologize? But you haven't done anything wrong." "I've done everything wrong," Charles said firmly. "I've allowed you to feel isolated and unsupported when you needed help the most. I've let concerns about appearances override my responsibility to care for my family." Kate felt tears welling up in her eyes. "Charles, please don't make this harder than it already is. Camilla was right about maintaining boundaries." "I shouldn't have." "No," Charles interrupted gently. "Camilla was wrong, and I was wrong for allowing her fears to hurt you." He looked around to make sure they were truly alone, then reached out and took Kate's hand, just as he had that evening in the garden weeks ago. Kate's breath caught in her throat. "I'm going to hold your hand, Kate," Charles said quietly, "because you're my family, and because you need to know that you're not alone in this life we've all chosen." Kate looked down at their joined hands, feeling the same comfort and safety she had felt that first evening. But this time the gesture felt different. It felt like an act of defiance, a statement that human connection was more important than political calculation. "What if someone sees us?" Kate whispered. "Then they'll see a father-in-law comforting his daughter-in-law," Charles replied. "And if they choose to make something ugly out of that, then the problem lies with them, not with us." They stood there for several minutes, not speaking, just allowing themselves to acknowledge the bond they had formed. Kate felt some of the tension she'd been carrying for weeks begin to ease from her shoulders. "I've missed our conversations," Kate admitted quietly. "So have I," Charles replied, "more than you know." From across the foyer, Camilla appeared in the doorway of the alcove. Her expression was unreadable as she took in the sight of her husband holding Kate's hand. Kate immediately tried to pull away, but Charles held on gently. "Charles," Camilla said carefully, "everyone is waiting for the walk to begin." "We'll be right there," Charles replied, not releasing Kate's hand or breaking eye contact with his wife. The moment stretched uncomfortably as the three of them stood in silent standoff. Kate could feel her heart pounding, waiting for Camilla to repeat her warnings about appropriate behavior. But instead, Camilla simply nodded and walked away. "She's not happy," Kate said as soon as Camilla was out of earshot. "Camilla will have to learn to live with her unhappiness," Charles replied. "I won't sacrifice your well-being to manage her insecurities." As they joined the rest of the family for their Christmas walk, Kate found herself walking beside Charles, their earlier easy companionship slowly returning. She could feel Camilla's watchful eyes on them, but for the first time in weeks she didn't care. William caught up with them, falling into step on Kate's other side. "Better?" he asked quietly. Kate squeezed both men's arms affectionately. "Much better." Behind them, Camilla walked alone, her jaw set in a hard line. She had clearly lost this particular battle, but anyone who knew her well could see that she wasn't ready to concede the war. The snow continued to fall gently around them as they walked through the palace gardens, but for Kate the world felt warmer than it had in weeks. She had her family back, even if it meant facing Camilla's displeasure. Some things, she was learning, were worth fighting for. The weeks following Christmas brought a new tension to the palace. Camilla had not openly confronted Charles about his decision to maintain his relationship with Kate, but her displeasure was evident in countless small ways. She spoke to Kate only when absolutely necessary, her tone polite but cold. During family meetings, she would subtly redirect conversations away from topics that might lead to Charles and Kate interacting. Kate tried to navigate this new reality carefully. She was grateful to have Charles's support back, but she was acutely aware that her relationship with Camilla had been permanently damaged. The queen consort's disapproval hung over every family gathering like a storm cloud. One particularly difficult evening came when the family was hosting a small dinner for visiting dignitaries. Kate was seated between Charles and one of the foreign guests, engaging in animated conversation about education initiatives. Charles was clearly enjoying Kate's passion for the subject, and their discussion was drawing positive attention from the other guests. Midway through the main course, Camilla suddenly spoke up from across the table. "Kate, dear," she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, "perhaps you could help me with the ladies' organization meeting next week. I think your input would be valuable." The request was innocent enough on the surface, but Kate recognized it as a strategic move to redirect the conversation away from her interaction with Charles. Kate felt her cheeks flush, but she nodded graciously. "Of course, Camilla. I'd be happy to help." Charles, however, was less subtle in his reaction. "Actually," he said firmly, "Kate and I were planning to visit the new children's hospital next week. It's been on our calendar for some time." The table fell silent. It was the first time Charles had openly contradicted Camilla in front of guests, and everyone present could feel the tension crackling between them. Camilla's smile faltered for just a moment before she recovered her composure. "How wonderful," Camilla said tightly. "I'm sure the children will be delighted to meet you both." The rest of the dinner passed in strained politeness, but Kate could barely concentrate on the conversation around her. She felt caught in the middle of a battle she hadn't asked to be part of, and she worried about the long-term consequences for the family. After the guests had departed, William approached Kate in the drawing room where she was reviewing her schedule for the following week. "That was quite a performance at dinner," he said, settling into the chair beside her. "I feel terrible about it," Kate admitted. "I never wanted to cause problems between Charles and Camilla." "You're not causing problems," William assured her. "You're just existing as a member of this family. If that threatens Camilla, then she needs to examine her own issues." "But what if this tears the family apart?" Kate asked. "What if Charles and Camilla's marriage suffers because of me?" William was quiet for a moment, considering his words carefully. "Kate, Dad spent decades in an unhappy marriage because he felt trapped by duty and other people's expectations. He finally found happiness with Camilla, but if she's going to try to control every relationship he has, then maybe their marriage has problems that have nothing to do with you." Meanwhile, in their private quarters, Charles and Camilla were having their most honest conversation in months. Camilla sat at her dressing table, removing her jewelry with sharp, angry movements. "I hope you're satisfied with yourself," she said without looking at Charles. "You've made your point quite publicly." "My point," Charles said calmly, "is that I won't allow you to manipulate my relationships with my family members." Camilla turned to face him, her eyes flashing with anger. "I'm trying to protect this family from scandal. I'm trying to protect you from making the same mistakes that have haunted the monarchy for generations." "What mistakes?" Charles asked. "Being kind to someone who needed support? Treating my daughter-in-law like family?" "You know exactly what I mean," Camilla said. "The way you look at her, the way you defend her, the way you prioritize her feelings over mine." "People will talk, Charles. They'll create stories where none exist." Charles stared at his wife for a long moment, finally understanding the depth of her insecurity.
"Camilla, are you jealous of Kate?"
The question hung in the air between them. Camilla's face went through several emotions before settling on defiance. "I'm protecting what we've built together." "What we've built together shouldn't be threatened by my relationship with Kate," Charles replied. "If you truly believe it is, then perhaps we need to examine what we've actually built." Camilla turned back to her mirror, her hands trembling slightly as she reached for her face cream. "I've spent years fighting for my place in this family, Charles. I won't be pushed aside now." "No one is pushing you aside," Charles said gently, "but I won't allow you to push Kate aside either." As they prepared for bed in silence, both Charles and Camilla knew that their marriage had reached a critical juncture. The question now was whether they could find a way forward that didn't require sacrificing Kate's well-being, or whether this conflict would ultimately force Charles to choose between his wife and his family's harmony. In her own room, Kate lay awake staring at the ceiling, wondering if she should have stayed quiet and accepted Camilla's original warning. The path she had chosen felt right in her heart, but she feared the cost might be higher than any of them had anticipated. Spring arrived early at the palace, bringing with it a sense of renewal and hope. The tensions that had dominated the winter months were still present, but they had settled into a kind of uneasy truce. Camilla had stopped openly challenging Charles's relationship with Kate, though her disapproval remained evident to anyone who knew how to read the subtle signs. The real change came on a quiet Tuesday morning when Kate received devastating news. Her childhood friend had been diagnosed with a serious illness, and Kate was struggling to process the information. She found herself wandering the palace corridors aimlessly, too upset to focus on her scheduled appointments. Charles encountered her in the portrait gallery, standing before a painting of Queen Victoria. Kate's shoulders were shaking slightly, and he could see that she was crying. "Kate," he said softly, approaching her carefully. "What's happened?" Kate turned to him with tears streaming down her face. "My friend Sarah," she managed to say. "She's been diagnosed with cancer. The doctors say it's quite advanced." Without hesitation, Charles opened his arms and Kate stepped into his embrace. He held her as she sobbed, offering the kind of comfort that only someone who truly understood loss could provide. They stood there in the gallery, surrounded by portraits of monarchs who had faced their own share of heartbreak and tragedy. "I'm so sorry," Charles murmured into her hair. "I know how much your friends mean to you." "I feel so helpless," Kate whispered. "Here I am living in a palace and I can't do anything to help her." "Love is never helpless," Charles said gently. "Being there for someone, caring about them, sharing their burden, that's everything." As Kate's tears began to subside, she became aware of footsteps in the gallery. She looked up to see Camilla standing in the doorway, having clearly witnessed the entire exchange. Kate started to pull away from Charles, but he kept his arms around her. "It's all right," he said quietly, meeting Camilla's eyes over Kate's head. For a long moment, the three of them stood frozen in tableau. Then, unexpectedly, Camilla walked forward. Her expression was softer than Kate had seen it in months. "What's wrong, dear?" Camilla asked, her voice gentle. Kate looked between Charles and Camilla, uncertain how to respond. "My friend is very ill," she said finally. Camilla's face immediately filled with sympathy. "Oh, Kate, I'm so sorry to hear that." She paused, then added, "Would you like me to arrange for the palace to send flowers, or perhaps we could organize a donation to cancer research in her name?" Kate was stunned by the kindness in Camilla's offer. That would be wonderful. Thank you." Camilla nodded, then looked at Charles. "Perhaps Kate should take the rest of the day off from her engagements. I can make the necessary calls." "That's very thoughtful of you," Charles replied, his voice warm with gratitude. As Camilla left to make the arrangements, Charles and Kate remained in the gallery. Kate was struggling to understand what had just happened. "She was kind to me," Kate said, almost in disbelief. "Camilla isn't a cruel person," Charles explained. "She's just been frightened. Sometimes fear makes us do things we wouldn't normally do." Over the following weeks, something shifted in the family dynamic. Camilla made genuine efforts to include Kate in conversations, and while their relationship was still cautious, it was no longer actively hostile. She seemed to have realized that Charles's affection for Kate didn't diminish his love for her. The breakthrough came during a family meeting about upcoming royal engagements. Charles was explaining a particularly complex ceremonial event when he reached out unconsciously and took Kate's hand to emphasize a point about protocol. It was a natural gesture, born of their comfortable relationship and shared understanding of royal duties. Kate tensed, waiting for Camilla's reaction. But when she looked across the table, she saw that Camilla was simply listening to Charles's explanation, apparently unbothered by the physical contact. After the meeting ended, Camilla approached Kate privately. "I owe you an apology," she said quietly. Kate looked at her in surprise. "You don't need to apologize for anything." "Yes, I do," Camilla insisted. "I let my own insecurities hurt you, and that was wrong. Charles cares about you because you're family, and I should have celebrated that instead of feeling threatened by it." "I never wanted to come between you and Charles," Kate said earnestly. "I know that now," Camilla replied, "and I want you to know that you don't have to walk on eggshells around me anymore. If Charles wants to hold your hand or give you a hug, he doesn't need my permission." That evening, the family gathered for dinner as usual, but this time, When Charles reached out to take Kate's hand during grace, there was no tension in the room. Camilla smiled at them both, and Kate felt a weight lift from her shoulders that she had been carrying for months. As they talked and laughed around the dinner table, Kate realized that families, even royal ones, were messy and complicated. They made mistakes and hurt each other sometimes. But if everyone was willing to work at it, to admit their faults and forgive each other, they could find their way back to love. Charles squeezed Kate's hand gently under the table, and she squeezed back, grateful for a family that had learned to choose connection over protocol, love over fear. It had taken them months to get to this point, but they had finally found their way home to each other.